this week's Bunkai Strategies, what we're looking at is a little thing we've looked at before, and it's this idea that when we're punching, we have hip rotation. And it's all about being absolutely sure of which way we want the force to travel. So what you'll see quite often is that we will either have the feet incredibly static and you get very little hip rotation, or you get people doing things like pulling this foot back to make a hip rotation. Now, it's a fair punch anyway, but what I really need to do is to work out the relationship between the driver and the brake. So if I'm throwing this hand as the punch, this hip's going to be the driver, and it's that hip that's got to move forwards. Now, pulling the other foot back doesn't get me anywhere. Right? I've got to have everything coming through to make that. We can glue the feet to the floor, or we can step, but what we're doing is making this hip come through. So that's a must. All right, now, what you see, if we just lose that for a second, is that if we were sparring, then little things like this might give us a little bit of backward movement for a nice extension to the punch and that little bit of safety for him, because actually it's a contraction that's stopping my punch from going miles. Whereas if I go to this foot and drive, this has the potential for a lot more travel and therefore more penetration of the target. So doing something like this means that I'm actually withdrawing, and withdrawing empty is fruitless. Now by empty, what I mean is that this side's coming back, I've got energy going backwards and it's not doing anything. Right, so that energy then is spent and it's not making this side come out any harder. However, if this side is pulling, then I might want to withdraw this side of my body. But it's not going to work with a punch. I'll show you what I mean. If I grab this and pull and put my punch out straight, he's gone. He's not in that space because of the pull. Tell you what, let's use the other hand. That hand's been grabbed. I go to punch, he's not there where my punch was going, and I'm in more danger. So you can see that pulling this side back while we're punching ain't clever. For those of us who study Heian Nidan or Pinan Shodan will have this kind of hip movement with the inside to outside block. Now, if you look at that situation, this has been latched, and while we're pulling this hip back, this happens. The rotation of the body is an additional bonus because he's travelling with the force of the movement, and I'm getting that wedge shake. Let's just show you that off the other arm. This hip's travelling back while this crank is going on. If I just hit the arm, I've got the strength of my arm, which might be sufficient or it might not. I need as many bonuses on my side as possible. So if I pull on this and rotate, I get that extra with the hip that gives me the movement. Which is why we're taught right from the beginning that hip rotation occurs with uke techniques, not with Yuzukis. Yuzuki, square hip, because I might be at an open position, but when I throw this, it all needs to be travelling forwards. Anything travelling backwards is a waste unless I'm pulling. And if I'm pulling, then I actually need to change my angle. Remember, we covered all that. Change my angle, which makes it still not a pull backwards. If I'm pulling and rotating backwards, I will also be taking an angle, and altogether that leads me to a square hip in this direction. Right? We don't punch around corners. You're not going to punch like that. It's going to be hampering power movement anyway. So if I were to punch over there where I've pulled him, then I need to twist the body, which gives me that square hip anyway. So it's a complicated issue, but it's one of these things where, you know, you're visiting and you see someone's moving and they're pulling that back to go to there, and you just think, if I want everything to travel forwards, then it ought to travel forwards, and if I was pulling, then I would also need to change my angle, because the pulling hand would relocate the opponent.